The movie begins with 3 Honda Civics chasing a truck on a highway. One of the drivers shoots a harpoon through the truck's windshield and uses it to pull himself inside. The truck driver fights back, but to no avail. The man puts him to sleep and takes control of the wheel. Fast forward to the next day and we're introduced to the movie's protagonist, Brian O'Connor. He parks his car and enters Toretto's, a market and cafe. He orders some food, and while he's chatting with a cashier named Mia, whom he seems to know, a friend of hers named Vince arrives at the store and he starts a brawl with Brian. To stop the fight, Mia calls her brother Dom and he breaks them up. The following day, Brian arrives at a street racing event where Dom participates, putting his car on the line. Eventually, Dom wins the race, but he doesn't get to celebrate for long because the cops show up. Everyone flees the scene and Dom parks his car and goes on foot. He gets spotted and starts running, but Brian helps him escape. While they distance themselves from the scene, a group of bikers led by Johnny Tran surrounds the car and tells Brian to pull over. They argue over territory and start shooting the car, which eventually explodes due to the nitrous oxide. They finally get to Dom's place and he invites Brian in. The next day, Brian gets pulled over by the cops and they drag him to the station. This is the moment where we find out that Brian works as an undercover agent. Brian is assigned to find the evidence needed to prove that Dom is involved in a series of robberies, including the one at the beginning of the movie. After that, Brian goes to Dom's garage and gives him the promised car that Dom earned from the race. Dom at first laughs at the car's condition, but after checking the engine, he withdraws his previous statements about it. He tells Brian that he's gonna need him for a race coming up. The next day, a group of street racers comes to the part shop where Brian works part-time. A guy named Hector, one of Dom's friends, wants to buy multiple car parts for 3 Honda Civics, and Brian sees that they match those from the robbery. He decides to further his investigation by sneaking into a garage looking for more evidence, but Dom suddenly appears and Vince knocks him unconscious. They start questioning him about what he was doing, and Brian says that he was looking for car parts to install on his car. Dom seems skeptical, and he takes Brian for a ride to another garage where they investigate Johnny Tran's cars. They find out that the cars are without engines, and when they're about to leave, Johnny Tran and his gang arrive at the scene. Brian, Dom, and Vince manage to hide while also paying attention to what's happening. Johnny and his men question an engineer about the missing engines and he doesn't know how to respond, and so they beat him up. Next, we see Brian being pressed by his superiors to find some more evidence linking Dom or Johnny to the robberies. Brian says that he's gonna need some more days. When Dom takes Brian to his home where he shows him his dad's Charger and explains to him how his father died in a car accident, that evening Brian goes to dinner with Mia and they go out for a drive afterward. At the same time, another hijacking, similar to the one from the beginning of the movie, takes place, and Brian's boss notifies him that he will arrest Johnny Tran. As expected, the next morning, the police arrest Johnny and his brother, Lance, but later they find that they have no concrete evidence to incriminate him. Brian's boss is upset and gives Brian 36 hours to find the evidence. Brian wanted to believe that Dom wasn't behind the robberies because he formed a pretty strong relationship with him. Brian takes the Supra for a ride and tells Dom that he wants in on whatever Dom is doing on the side to earn his money. Dom tells Brian that he needs to first prove himself at Race Wars, a racing event that takes place in a few days. A friend of Dom, Jesse, races Johnny for the slips. Jesse loses, but instead of handing over the car to Johnny, he decides to drive away. Johnny comes to Dom and tells him to get the car from Jesse. Dom denies, and Johnny tells him about the raid and how he thinks he was the one who set him up. After hearing this, Dom angrily starts punching him until Vince takes him off and tells him that he never ratted on anybody. That night, Brian sees Dom and his crew go for a ride at 2 a.m. and figures out that they're going for another hijacking. Brian lets Mia know that he is a cop and that she must come with him to stop them from the robbery because he knows that the police will find out about it and arrest them. Mia finally agrees out of love for her friends and they go on Dom's trail. Dom and his crew switch to the Civics and find the truck. Vince is the one to harpoon the seat and get hold of the wheel. When he jumps, though, he almost gets shot by the truck driver who keeps trying to get rid of them. When Vince tries jumping back, the truck driver suddenly brakes and Vince traps his arm on the wire. Then, the truck driver bumps into Letty, Dom's girlfriend, causing her to crash. Dom tells the other driver to take care of her while he's gonna try to free Vince. Things don't go as planned when the truck driver shoots at Dom's car, causing it to stop. Then Brian, alongside Mia, shows up and he jumps on the truck and frees Vince. They take him out of the car while Dom and his crew arrive. Then Brian calls the ambulance, revealing that he is a cop. Brian arrives at Dom's place, wanting to arrest him, but Dom tells him that he needs to find Jesse before Johnny and his boys take him out. That's when Jesse pulls up. It doesn't take too long for Johnny and his brother to roll by and shoot at them. Dom and Brian take cover, but they catch Jesse unprepared and he gets shot. Then Dom and Brian start chasing Johnny and his brother. Dom cuts one off and Brian shoots and kills the other. Afterwards, Brian spots Dom in his car and starts chasing him. They meet at a stoplight where they decide to drag race. Dom has the start, but Brian catches up. A train passes through where the quarter-mile ends and they manage to pass it at the same time at the last moment. Right after avoiding the train, a truck comes from the side and crashes into Dom. He manages to survive the crash with minor injuries. They hear the cops coming and Brian hands over the keys to his Toyota Supra to Dom to help him escape, and also because he still owes him a car.